Welcome to this new podcast series, The Female Trickster. This is part of a wider project called The Other Tricksters. In this series, I interview artists, curators, a clown, performers and dancers, all of them based in Gothenburg, Sweden. In today's episode, I'm going to do a Q&A session about this series with fellow artist Riikka Gröndahl.
Let's start just you introducing yourself and this new podcast series that you've made or you've been making.
Okay, so I am Danielle Heath. It always feels weird to give your name a full name. I'm an artist. I live and work here in Gothenburg, and I've been here for probably about 5 years now, working in visual art and sometimes a little bit of performance. And I've started this podcast series to go and talk to people about the idea of the trickster and kind of what the trickster is when it's not just being allocated to a man, which it traditionally has been. And I thought the best way to do that was for me to go and speak to people rather than kind of just reading about it, because it's sort of, I wanted to know what it was like embodied, like actually in people's bodies. What is it like to be tricking people? How do you do that? How do you kind of deal with the difficulty of how that must feel? And so I kind of searched around looking at people's work, trying to figure out if I could see trickster elements in their work, and then tried to find them to ask them very nicely to come and speak to me for a few hours.
Would you like to briefly give us a definition of trickster? Yeah. I've listened to the podcast and I understand it's a very broad term, but if you can give us some entry to it.
Yeah, so traditionally speaking as well, we're talking tricksters are always given as male, but they're characters that can either be using their intelligence or secret knowledge to try and gain their upper hand in a situation, or it can be somebody who's just very foolish but somehow is agitating at the edges of society and affecting maybe the people in power, or just sort of changing things up very gently and maybe manipulatively. And their morals are normally a little bit hard to define, and maybe going by their own rules and their own sort of set of morals that they've made up along the way. But yeah, it is really broad, and you can kind of give all these characters like the Joker or the jester or sort of the traditional fool are kind of put together in the idea of the trickster. But generally speaking, it's normally a character around people in power who's poking at power, and maybe mocking it sometimes, but sort of just about getting away with it.
And this, you have a larger project called The Other Trickster. And as I understood that this podcast series is now called The Female Trickster. And you are interested especially in this because you mentioned that traditionally we have this character of a male trickster. And now with these interviews you are...
I mean, it's tricky because tricky being a trickster, but all I was really interested in is finding out who this trickster character was when it wasn't allocated to males, and kind of what's the nature of that sort of trickery, or what's the nature of how that behavior is in bodies that are not just given this allocation of male. And I started that out with this quite binary reaction by saying the female trickster, so sort of, but really what I'm trying to find out about is anything that is not given this male overcoat. And sort of, and like somehow the trickster uses some male privilege to be able to be. And so I wanted to find out about people who aren't using that coat of privilege. Yeah. So really I'm talking about the other tricksters. So it kind of anyone who isn't defining themselves by this male overcoat. So any kind of, so other genders, non-binary genders that sort of have maybe had even a fleeting relationship to male and now are not sitting in male, or used to have a previous relationship to female but now are sitting in male. It's sort of, they're still other than this sort of traditional male. So that's why the other tricksters rather than just the female trickster. But I caught myself up at the beginning by calling it the female trickster. And then, and I've hopefully tried to expand that now. Yeah.
And I know you from some years, and I know that you looked into this topic for several years now. So maybe you can tell us a little bit of the background of that, your interest. Why are you doing this?
Okay, so that comes from a few different places, but one of the main things was that I was starting to look at situations in history when society gets turned upside down. So when the power relationship gets turned upside down for a temporary period of time. And because this keeps on happening in different times and eras, so you have things in the Roman era and things in sort of medieval European era where you have kind of the fool becoming the king for the day or the king becoming the fool for the day, and this power relationship gets turned on its head, and the church might be able to be mocked for this one day, for just one day, and then it all kind of collapses back in on itself, back into this rigid society. And I was kind of curious at where that kind of characteristic could be placed as an individual. So, and then that's kind of how I got to the trickster character. But I also had this, I think, interest in how individuals survive places of power. Like as individuals, how do you get through institutions and structures of power and forms that don't necessarily fit them? And how do you do it with like humor and keeping some level of your humanity and your wit and still figure out your way round difficult power relationships and maybe influence them as well? Maybe you get to be a little bit, change things up. And so there's kind of like this personal interest in going and asking people is like, I want to know all of their tricks for myself because I want to succeed in places which I find confusing.
And of course, now I want to know if you learned some tricks.
Yeah, I think as I've been speaking to people, I am learning tricks. That's the thing that's so interesting. And more that it's the question of that it's quite tough. Like you will have to put yourself out there. If you want to be a trickster, you're going to have to be present and put yourself out there and work through these things, and also learn how to play and how to tap dance and how to do these, use your charm as well. Like, how do you use your charm in these situations? How do you change that situation into play? And interestingly, talking to someone like the clown, it felt like, oh, you sometimes have to let go of maybe your ego to be willing to be the kind of fool in that situation to get to an interesting place and to kind of free you up from the structure that might be surrounding you. But it comes at this price of maybe they won't see you as the the highly respectable intellect or something. So yeah, slowly. I don't know if I've learned everything yet.
Yeah, I guess you never can learn anything. But I was thinking, one of the people you interviewed was a clown, and then there was some kind of other visual artist or an artist who used performance, and then dancers, and I think that you have this kind of conversational style with the people I don't even want to call them interviews because it doesn't seem to kind of fit. I feel like there is a nice element of kind of trickster going on also in the podcasts. Do you want to share something of the process of meeting these individuals?
That's a really nice way of thinking about it, and a really nice thing to say, actually. They sort of going to meet them, I realised that half of the reason I want to speak to people is because I value talking to people. A kind of over going and studying something. I valuing this embodied conversation because it feels like it's an experiment each time. And I think subconsciously, I'm not going to pretend that I went into those things knowing that this was going to work in this way, but I subconsciously went in going, I just want to talk to people and see what happens. I didn't want to go in there and purposely didn't go in with like a list of questions or a thing, because I realised I knew that I would get very kind of closed answers that didn't expand me into how they felt about it or how that was, or how just revealing a bit more about how that is to be in that character in those moments, or how it is to just navigate life. And so, I don't know, I kind of valued those wandering converstions, and I think they are quite trickster. I think you're right, actually. I'm going to claim...
And they definitely have this humor in them, even if some of the topics or a lot of the topics are kind of serious and talking about power.
I mean, I hope so, because I think the approach is always with a certain sense of humor round. It's like using humor to get round things. So I kind of want that to be part of the conversation too. Yeah. But somebody told me that they could listen whilst they were doing the ironing, and I was like, well, that feels like a success for a podcast.
Yeah. What I enjoyed is that there's this level of intimacy, especially in some of the podcasts where I think you are interviewing people who you also personally know maybe a bit more. And it really felt that as a listener, I was just sitting with the two of you around a table, and I could have come up, somehow commented also. So it was like, I felt that you charmed these people into this intimate moment, which was then actually public. I think. Yeah, I hope that's some trickster learning I've taken on and started doing subconsciously, but I can't admit to doing it consciously. I was just trying it out. And for sure that in one of the podcasts, the person started to kind of ask you a lot of questions also. Yeah. So it was a really interesting play of these two trickster characters almost.
I think that was with you mean in the first podcast with Annika. I thought that was really interesting because she really did like start giving it back, and it felt like we were both sort of trying to get round the other one to get more stories out. I think it's quite nice, the idea of us sort of sparring like a trickster, like sort of how can I get you to tell me more about yourself?
I don't know if this is you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but who would you recommend this podcast to? Who would you kind of would like to see this be listened by?
It's interesting because I made an assumption when I started making this that basically it would be all the arty people I know who would listen, but in reality, I hope it can be heard by anyone with an idea of like questioning structures around them, and also with the idea in the same way that I think I'm searching for, which is like, how do you survive structures and how do you get round those and keep maybe some of your humor and maybe some of your humanity intact? And it's like, well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. So that's what I'm asking people. And I think I'm not the only one who's trying to figure that out. So anyone else who wants to know how to get around these situations, especially if you're, for whatever reason, don't fit into those structures, which I think is probably like nearly 100% of us, right?
Yeah.
So, like,
exactly.
So
that was nicely put. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe this. I think one thing that was mentioned in few of the podcasts was this kind of this idea of this artist myth and this narrative that we maybe create to our artistic careers afterwards. Yes. We say, I did this and then it naturally led to this. And so how does this work then? Where does it fit in your artistic practice in this intact narrative?
Where does it fit in my own personal myth of my genius?
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it fits. So this is probably a lie, but I'm going to go for it anyway. It fits in the way of me reassessing and valuing conversations over given knowledge. So knowledge given and handed down to me by books or by sort of, I don't know, people maybe in higher positions of power. So it goes with this myth that I think I'm trying to figure out, which is almost part of my dyslexic brain myth, which is trying to find what's the way round a situation, like what's the way round intellectual learning, like how do I figure this out so I can get out of it and go round it. So it goes into this myth of me trying to explore that and trying to maybe give value to that, and then it also just goes with my personal myth where I think most of my artwork is hilarious, but I know that everyone else doesn't. And and so that's kind of really is why I'm so intrigued by the Trickster. And also I think I don't feel like the hero. I don't feel like the protagonist hero, the one who nails it. I don't feel like the goodie in my stories, but I also don't feel like the baddie 100% either. So it goes with my artistic myth in the way that I'm always trying to find the uncertain, not sure place. And so, yeah, that's why I think it fits perfectly. Absolutely perfectly to take me to the next step of my genius in my personal myth of growth. Yep, as an artist. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And please don't believe that. Like, it's not true.
No, I took it.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know if you wanted to, because also I know that maybe this was one of the kind of first times when you were working with other people. As artists, we often tend to work alone. Yeah. But you had a sound designer and somebody who composed the music for this. I don't know if you
I would, these people. Which has been such a revelation. Absolutely. So the editor is Therese Larsson, and Therese has I think actually this wasn't maybe her, I think it might have been her first time being an editor. She works with sound and is kind of like a sound expert. And I think she's an expert. I don't know if she would classify herself as that or not, but she works very well with sound. And I asked her to be my editor, and she just kept on making such good decisions on the cuts. And it's just so nice to be not having to be like the professional in every aspect of making a work, and be able to hand that over to somebody who then really just made great choices. It was sort of such a relief. And it's interesting because we've worked very individualistically. I've gone off and done recording, and then I've handed that over to her as an editor. And then she's made all these choices and then sent it back to me. And if there's like one or two little bits, I might go, oh, maybe we could hear a bit more of this or whatever. But mostly she's sort of nailed it first time. And it's been, I mean, it's just been like a walk in the park compared to, you know, just sweating over trying to make those choices when you've been involved and you'd have no like view on what's good or what isn't. So it's been a really nice thing to do, to work with somebody, but I must admit we haven't seen each other for most of it. It's been like this distant working. So I think it's quite an interesting form of collaboration. But yeah,
it fits these modern times, these times we have now.
Yeah.
Well, I think
we go and make something quietly in your own corner and then send it off to somebody else. But I also think every conversation has felt like a collaboration. Like it just has felt like every time which felt quite nice. Like it wasn't all down to me to guide this conversation into something that was interesting. It was like it was sort of this back and forth, and I felt like eventually we just sort of got there somehow. But yeah, I definitely didn't feel alone in doing that, which was nice. Yeah. So it's been collaborative. It's been quite a big collaboration for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Yeah.
I think that at this moment of a Q&A, usually we would hand out the mics to the audience, but now that we are the two of us only, I thought that I would have asked if there's something you would have wanted me to ask, if there's something you would like to still share or answer to.
I think it's interesting because I think I've kind of answered most of the questions that I was thinking would be nice to answer, but I was I was rethinking. I kind of want to sometimes retract the answers you give after you've just given them. What was I going to say? I was thinking of about learning about tricksters. I would sort of still feel I thought I would take that back and go, I'm still pretty lost. I'm still not sure, and I keep on wanting to go and ask people more. Like, I don't know if what I reach is an answer by going and talking to people, but I'm still interested in doing it. So,
and I think also that this trickster character is that it has this, how do you say, this myriad of forms. So every time it's different, and every one of us who likes to think of us as tricksters at some point or something, we do it differently. So I guess from everybody you get a little bit of, but then you have to still kind of work your way.
It is figuring out the magic, like, because I think it is, and it is probably super individualistic. And the trickster is really loose. So that's half of it, is that it's so loose, but with some level of tangibility, something that you understand, you can start seeing what is trickster, what is like that character. But it also feels quite a lot of the time like, what's the bit of people that are human, that aren't like nailing it 100% of the time, or aren't, just 100% being awful. It's the people who are sort of wiggling around in the middle, desperately trying. So that's really tragic.
And like you said, all of us.
Yeah. Basically all of us, right? All of us. So, yeah.
Maybe to end with the question is, because you have this larger project, the Other Trickster. I don't know if you have something you could share already. What's going to happen in the future with this?
Well, the other
if you have any thoughts, or if it's a secret, or
well,
if you have any interests where it could go.
Well, I mean, I have an interest in keep this going. I want to talk to more people and do more of these. And I did some earlier ones before I recorded these ones that were in the UK, but it was only about 2 or 3. And they were really interesting. So I would like to publish them because they were, again, just me trying to figure this out. But I was even more nervous and quiet than I was in these ones. So, we'll see how they come out. But also the Other Trickster is partly just turning up in apart from talking to other people and trying to sort of find out who these other tricksters are, I think it's just turning up in my art practice. So it's turning up in sculptures that I'm trying to make at the moment, and kind of installation works that I'm trying to get the audience to play with, or kind of feel uneasy about, in the best possible way. But so that level of still personally feeling unsure and thinking that there's value in that uncertainty, I kind of contribute to the tricksters, and I want to sort of create that uncertainty for others, hoping there's some freedom in there. I don't know. I think that's
such a beautiful way to end. I think so.
Thank you, Riikka. Thank you so much for asking me questions.
Oh yeah, and I forgot to introduce you as the coolest artist I've met. It's on record now.
Felt so sincere. Today's conversation was with Riikka Gröndahl and me, Danielle Heath. The sound work and editor was Therese Larsson.